Hi everyone, it's Ardyth. Welcome to this month's Innovations with Ardyth. Today I'm featuring some of the products coming in the March 2020 Essentials by Ellen release. This release is a big one, and it has a ton of products in lots of styles, so there's really something for everyone. In this video, I'm making 3 cards that really show off the new succulent stamp sets. Mondo Succulent Pot, which has a large image along with a few sentiments in a spiky handwritten font. Modern Succulents, which has 4 smaller succulent images and more serious text font sentiments. Coordinating dies are also available. And finally, Succulent Sentiments, which has more of those handwritten sentiments as well as some text sentiments which are both funny and punny. To start, I'm going to do some ink blending on cardstock that I'll cut my letters from. I'm using life-changing blender brushes and some polished ink from Catherine Pooler Designs. I'm putting it on heavy on the left and then releasing pressure and lightening it up as it moves to the right. I want it to fade to white up near the top. To deepen the bottom edge, I added some rouge ink, and then I went back over with the polished ink just to smooth that blend out a bit. I'm going to use the new Mondo OMG die, but I just need M's for my card. So I trimmed my cardstock smaller so that I can just run it through my Gemini Junior just to get the M's. For my O, I'm going to use the new Essential Circles dies, and I'll just look at a couple to see which size is going to work best. I don't want to cover up too much of those M's, but I also want it to be big enough to have part of the succulent image on it. I used my Mini Misty and some Copic-friendly black ink to stamp the image on white cardstock. Then I put my circle die up against it to see which area I would like to include in my O. There's a number of options here, but in the end, I decided I would use this one, mostly because I like the symmetry of it. Next comes a bunch of Copic coloring, and I'm using warm tones of greens for this succulent. I'm going in just like I would with a flower, and I'm putting the darkest color in close to the center, and then blending it with a lighter green color. Sometimes I like to go light to dark, and sometimes I like to go dark to light with my Copic coloring. I find that usually I don't see much of a difference in my results. To save some time, I cut the succulent out of the image with my circle die so that I don't end up coloring more than I really need to. I tried to color the edges with a pink that matches the M's, but it turned out that the colors I chose were a really bit too much on the coral side. I fixed that by going in with a very, very bright pink, and that gives me more of a true pink color that will match my other letters better. To add some subtle interest in the background, I want to stamp the succulent pot so that it will line up with the colored-in succulent in my mom word. To do this, I put a piece of acetate over top of my panel with the M's so that I could position the stamp where I want it. Once I had it positioned in the correct spot, I stamped it with Twilight ink from Catherine Pooler Designs. Now it's just a matter of assembling the card. I really like this Make Art station for lining up letters. You use the grid on the work surface, and then the magnetic ruler helps to make sure that your letters are perfectly straight and in line. I used Nouveau Deluxe adhesive to glue the M's on each side of the card, and then it was time to add the O in the center. I added the gray frame to the circle, and then I popped it up with foam tape, positioning it so that the succulent matches the stamped image underneath. My white panel was cut with one of the Essential Rectangles dies, and now I'm adding a gray frame around it to add some definition to the edges of the card. And here's the finished card. I plan to use this for my mom's birthday, which is coming up soon, but of course it would be a pretty Mother's Day card as well. For my second card, I did some inlaid die cutting with one of the circle dies. I've overlapped the 3 circle cutouts. I cut the top and bottom ones first, before I cut the third one out that kind of overlaps in the middle there. I kept all the pieces organized, and I started by coloring the frames with a dark gray Copic marker. This will match my card base and tie everything in, and add a nice border around each of the circles and really define all those areas. For the circle shapes themselves, I wanted to ink blend from the bottom and fade out to the top, so I put each one back in so I could see where the bottom was so that I would know where to start my ink blending and how to let it fade out. I used Mandarin Spice, which is a nice warm orange, And then I moved into lemongrass, which is kind of a greeny yellow. My final color was polished, which is the same color I used for my first card. This time I used sponge daubers to give me lots of control over these little areas. Next, I stamped the 3 modern succulent images with Copic-friendly ink using my Mini Misty. And then I did some more Copic coloring. I colored the succulents all with the same green shades that I used on the first card. These are actually BG markers, but they're far enough down in the numbered color families, they're quite green. I kept the pots neutral and I colored them with warm gray markers, which will again match my card base, but will also not detract from the bold colors that have been blended onto the circle shapes. It's really easy to add some good shading and depth to these pots with these gray markers. I love this geometric hexagon pot, and I figured it would have one side that is much lighter than the rest. For the next pot, it's easy to add shading on each side to make it look round, and also just to add a bit of depth underneath the rim to give that a bit more dimension. The final one was a little fussier because all those leaves are hanging over the pot, but I followed the same method with darker gray on the edges and lighter gray in the center to give the look of rounded dimension. Okay, now comes the inlaying part. These simple shapes really surprised me, and I found this very tricky to put back together. I love inlaid die cutting, and I've done a lot of it, but this one was almost too much for me. After I finished, I thought of a solution that would have made this much easier. I could have used press and seal to pick all the pieces up in one piece, then peel each piece back and color it, and put it right back in place on the press and seal, before then putting the whole press and seal back into the card. I'll have to do that next time I try something this complicated. This took me a while, and I won't keep it all in for you, but I did mostly get there. Notice that I left that one piece between the orange and yellow circles unblended, because I wanted to be sure that I got the blending in the correct place. I'm not sure that I did, but my intention was good. When I put that piece in place, it was clear that the final piece of frame wasn't going to fit, and I'd messed up somewhere. Rather than frustrate myself, I gave in and just glued that last piece where it needed to go, even though it was kind of on top of another piece and not truly inlaid. But by the time I popped up those 3 succulents and put them in place, no one will even notice unless they're looking very closely. To finish the card, I added the hello sentiment from the Mondo succulent pot and some diamond stickles on the plants to add a bit of sparkle. For my final card, I used my Misty corners to allow me to stamp off the edge of a white panel of cardstock. I used the Mondo succulent pot again, and for the second stamping on the other corner, I just put the cardstock up into the top right corner of my Misty, and I placed the stamp carefully down because I hadn't even cleaned it, and I stamped it again. So then I had 2 slightly different perspectives of that arrangement on my cardstock, with a nice area in the center for my sentiment. Next, I stamped the image again onto some computer paper to create a couple of masks. I stamped it on one, but then I cut it from 2 papers at the same time, just using some sharp scissors and cutting around the line. I really just wanted to kind of protect the image from the splattering I'm about to do, so I wasn't too concerned about how precise the mask was. I used some temporary adhesive to put the masks over top of my panel, and I got out my waffle flower water media mat, and also some Distress Oxide sprays. I had a bit of a disaster with this Festive Berries one. I hadn't removed the packaging properly, and I started opening the lid and things started leaking all over the place, and it's looking like a murder scene here. So I had a bit of cleanup to do after I was finished. But I started by giving each spray a good shake, and then I just took the spray mechanism out and I used it to put some splatters over my card. I wanted a mostly white card, but I did want a bit of color on it, and this is a very easy and fun way to do it. I don't have a dark green Distress Oxide spray, so I used a Nuvo Sparkle spray, and this one has the added bonus of a bit of shimmer built right in. It's a nice deep green, which is perfect for the succulents. And you can see that my masks didn't really hold everything back because they're just computer paper and some of those splatters soaked through. I gave the panel a quick dry with my heat gun, and then I spritzed the whole thing with Avery Elle Clear Shimmer Spray. That gives it a nice overall shimmer without changing any of the colors. To finish this card, I took one of the smaller essential rectangles and I cut it from the center of the panel. This is something I like to do when I have a very simple card. It just adds a bit of interest. For my sentiment, I spent some time looking at these smaller essential rectangles dies and putting them up against some of the sentiments from the various sets to choose one. In the end, I decided to go with the smallest rectangle and the With Sympathy sentiment from Modern Succulents. I stamped it with WOW embossing ink on slate cardstock, and then I embossed it with white embossing powder. To assemble the card, I put some adhesive on the back of the frame, and I used the corner of my mini Misty to help line it up so that it was exactly on the edge of the card. And that was after I made sure that I had the card opening in the correct way so that everything would line up properly. I've learned that one the hard way. To pop up the center rectangle with the gray frame, I found the easiest thing to do was to use tape to attach the frame to the rectangle. This way I could make sure that it runs along that very narrow edge and it holds everything together. Then I did the same thing with the foam tape. I ran it right up to the edge so that it was covering both the white rectangle and the gray frame, and that way everything will stay in place. Then it's just a matter of laying the rectangle into the frame. For this one, I just glued the sentiment flat on top of that raised rectangle. This is a simple sympathy card, but it does have a bit of shimmer to make it very elegant. I hope you've enjoyed this video and you enjoyed getting a good look at some of the new products coming up. They'll all be available on March 8th in the Ellen Hutson shop. Be sure to watch for all our regular release celebrations, including a blog hop and giveaways. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.